Hello.
Hi, guys.
Hello from
Nice to see you.
me and the team. We really need to have a standardized hello. I still think it's the only flaw in this program. You know, we were going
to maybe some music as well.
We were going to get it at a different note or something, you know, but that would just be so cringeworthy. Speaking of cringeworthy, a funny thing happened to me last night that I wanted to share with you. I was playing my favorite game of the moment, which is Helldivers 2, which is a cooperative game where you land on planets and get into fights with either Terminators or bugs. And it's incredible fun. And I've met a lot of lovely people playing it. But last night was different. And I just wanted to play this to you because I thought it was very funny. Here we go. So just enjoy. And listen carefully to the voices. Oh yeah, just one last bit of background. I was trying to ask him how to change a button or what button to press to get your mic to work all the time, because he was complaining my mic was open and it was feeding back. So I was asking him, you know, how do you do that? So anyway, this is what happened.
Yeah, you just push to talk.
Yeah, but sorry, what button on the controller do I press when I want to talk? Like, how are you doing it when you talk?
Tagging location.
Oh, fucking hell, you're actually Graham Linehan, aren't you?
Yeah. Excuse me.
Marking location. Cancel that.
Okay, I'm out.
Allied destroyer has left the squadron.
He just left.
He just left, yeah. I guess he thought I'd start asking him about, you know, if he was going to apologize for the puberty blockers thing or something. But yeah, that really it was very, very funny. And but
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you'd think if you were like really on the side of giving puberty blockers to kids, etc., having you on the game with him and chatting would be an excellent opportunity for him to, I don't know, try and change your mind or something. But obviously that's not. He's just like, I'm out.
Yeah, it's almost as if they want to change people's minds through coercion, isn't it? And
yes,
discussion. So it's interesting.
But that is interesting because I've been having a Twitter back and forth with somebody who's who's been around for years, who made the very clear statement that there were that she had evidence of overwhelmingly positive outcomes for giving kids puberty blockers. And I said, well, can you link to this evidence? And she said, yes, I can. And then went on to say something else. And I said, yeah, but where is it? And well, where's your evidence? And I'm like, but I don't actually need any evidence because, you know, absent any evidence at all, the default is to not actually stop kids going through puberty. So where's your evidence? You haven't given any evidence, but I thought you said you could link to your evidence. Don't you want to change my mind? And no, it turns out that this person did not want to seize the opportunity because the answer to that was, you wouldn't change your mind.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
They don't want to change people's minds. It's so funny. Like, we're in an election season in the U.S. right now and in North America by extension. Elections are about trying to persuade people to join your side, but purity spirals are about trying to kick everyone out who isn't pure. So it's kind of like you're watching people on the left almost deliberately trying to lose the election because they're not trying to persuade people to join them. They're trying to tell each other to block out all the bad people. And it's such a weird downward spiral, a feedback loop, because the people on the left are panicking that the right is gaining power. And instead of working harder to persuade the right and to change their minds, they're locking down and hunkering down and trying to form their little silo of purity, which is the opposite of getting elected. They're almost
Well,
trying to not get elected.
But here I remember, people from the Green Party and the Lib Dems and Labour saying to women, well, we don't want your vote then. If you're, if you're TERFs, we don't want your vote.
Yeah, they did. They've said that.
That's such a weird stance, isn't it? I mean,
That's shocking.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
literally, that's a literal example of that. I can't believe it. They're literally saying, no, don't vote for us. You're not pure enough.
Your wish is my command, sir.
But I mean, that's interesting because I made a comment about, so Trump, there was a little clip online where Trump said, and there will be no men in women's sports, and lots of people cheered. And I quoted this with the point that the huge problem, the bigger problem here is that people can't necessarily tell who is lying to them about trade deficits or how immigration works, etc., etc. But on this, it's fairly clear. They can see the people who are saying to them, no, these men are now women and they're going to play in women's sports. And they can see where people are saying, no, they're actually men and they won't be able to play in women's sports. And they will use that as a litmus test, not people who are already entrenched. But for your average person who doesn't really take much notice, they'll kind of use that as a litmus test to think, well, who's the party seemingly right now with the most integrity or who are being honest? But what was really interesting, most people understood my point. But you've got this core of people who just want to argue. We're saying, oh, so you're going to vote Trump. You love Trump. This is a terrible thing. I'm like, I'm actually even in the UK, and that's not the point. The point is that the Democrats have created a massive open goal here because it isn't about sports. This one, my point was, it isn't about sports. It's what the reaction to sports is telling you. And the reaction to sports on one side is reasonable and on the other is not. And this is really bad. The Democrats are doing a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
we're in a crisis of trust right now. Like, nobody knows who to trust. No, everybody's in their own little informational bubble silos. Nobody can work out anything because social media is just kind of, there's no such thing as a baseline of normal. So there's no such thing as an extreme to compare against normal. We're not all tuning in to watch Friends every Thursday at 8:30 and seeing what a kind of normal looks like. And then comparing, like everybody's obsessed with Friends 30 years later. Because it was like there was the baseline normal in Friends. Nobody had a cell phone. Nobody was in their own weird extreme left, extreme right bubbles. Everybody, there was a normal. And then if you had views that were more progressive or more conservative than the Friends, at least you knew where you stood in society. And now there's none of that anymore, and everybody doesn't know who to trust. And it's just it. It's a very common sense, very practical, very readily accessible litmus test of trust. Do you know what a man and a woman is? And the Democrats, whose policies have generally been a lot less self-serving in history than the Republicans, have lost everyone's trust. People just don't see that, Yeah,
I don't see it. I think that, I look back now at even Obama, who I believe was also put in place by the Fitzers, was it? Who's the big donator to the Democrats? Who's a trans billionaire?
Oh, Pritzkers, the Pritzkers.
Very Pritzkers, and it just makes me feel like, this is all just powerful men moving pieces around, and I've completely lost all faith in the left, I hope I'm not in danger of, going to the right. I feel like I've just stood still and remained consistent. But why would I? Actually, though, having said that, I will say this interesting thing, something I found interesting this week. We've had a lot of really good moments since Labour got into power. It's really interesting,
Well, I think before the election, we were saying that it is possible that the Labour Party was playing it down, sort of trying not to say too much so that they wouldn't alienate the far left of the party. But I was hoping that once they were in, that they would not, with quite a majority, that they wouldn't need to pander to the far left. And there are some things that they've done. I mean, I think in the King's speech, they were they've reaffirmed their commitment to banning conversion therapy.
Sure, but they kicked the can down the road, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And I think they'll just kick it into the long grass. But, Wes Streeting, like, that's massively decisive. It's taken what the Tories have done and gone further to say, we're permanently banning it, which, is excellent. It is excellent. But and they've even went so far as to commission the looking into the fake suicide statistics that Owen Jones and Joe Mom have been peddling, which quite frankly is so reckless and so irresponsible. We've been saying this for years, that trans activists with their would you rather have a live daughter or a dead son? It's such a ridiculously low bar that they've set themselves there for the argument. They don't need to make any arguments as to the efficacy of puberty blockers. That's all they need to say is, well, people won't kill themselves because of it. And so then they don't even have to consider all the side effects. They will just say, well, it's this, it's either this, so anything else is fine. Yeah.
But also, I wonder whether I'm not sure it is fair of me to say they kicked the can down the road, because I think they said they will do it after consultation. Now, the brilliant thing about consultations is they don't go well for the other side, because the other side are insane. And, as soon as things like that, like the CAS report, it's a shame it took 4 years for something that everyone with any sense knows already, that you don't confuse kids at a time when their body is going through such massive changes, or should be at least. I just wonder whether they are actually doing. God, if they are being this clever politically, if they're actually just kind of putting the trans movement in a position to expose itself, as Jolien Mom and Owen Jones did this week, like it's wonderful to see them falling like lemmings into these traps, and I'm just hoping it continues, because here's the thing. Sorry, I know I've gone on for a bit, but I just wanted to make one last little point. They can't be a party that says, oh yeah, puberty blockers, which every fucking trans rights activist and trans person, that incredibly broad term that takes in so many people, have been saying that these were essential drugs. So it fatally damages their credibility as well. Okay. And it's people like that, like Sean Fay and Paris, what's his name, and all the other Jane Fay. These are the people who've been pushing this bullshit, So any one of these people who has been pushing this bullshit needs to be, ostracized from any kind of moral group of people.
Well, I think one, apart from the fake suicide statistics, so now he's gone off on Mom seems to have gone off on a walking holiday for 2 weeks. I mean, honest to God. But I noticed the Good Law Project, which I'm obviously, none of us can read Mom because we're all blocked. It's all secondhand. There was a 33 tweet thread in response, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's a good sign. That's always a good sign. The 33 tweet thread. It's done wonders for Aidan Comerford's credibility.
But I noticed that the Good Law Project tweeted a parent's perspective, a letter from a mother, and honest to God, it got ratioed to all hell because it was the most terrible thing. I even saw a couple of trans activists saying, one saying, look, I'm fully on board. I am completely on board with everything. However, 4 years old, that seems wrong, because it was this mother, the mother was talking, I don't know if you've read it, but the mother was talking about what she called her daughter, who doesn't even remember living as a male because it started when he was 4 years old. And the obvious problem there is is that this bloke doesn't even fucking remember. He doesn't know. He knows nothing. He knows nothing else but that his parents have told him that he's a girl for the last 10 years. And now he's coming up to puberty. The parents are absolutely fucking panicked because it's going to change everything. And instead of saying, shit, we've done a really terrible thing, they want to prevent him from being able to, it's the most astonishing thing. They want to prevent him from growing up because they have fucked up his childhood. There were loads and loads of responses saying this is terrible. But what was interesting to me were the people who I checked, didn't follow me, not followed by anyone that I follow, saying, I'm not on board with this. I've stopped donating to the Good Law Project on this basis. There were a number of people who had read it and said, this is wrong. Like, this seems wrong, because 4 years old, and they had tweeted it out, thinking that this was good.
Yeah.
But it was heartbreaking, but not in the way that they thought it was.
Yeah.
They can't even argue that he was struggling. If they were saying, we did this to him before he even knew anything else, they've just taken away their own argument that he's like trying desperately to get into the other sex. They took away their own argument in their own delusion. The whole point is supposed to be that they just can't reconcile with their sex, and we've tried everything, so we just have to give them a cross sex. And it's like, they're saying, well, actually, no, we never even gave them the choice, because children's memories do disappear before the age of 4. Up until the age of 7, you can remember everything. You can remember practically popping out of the vagina, But then after the age of 7, all your memories from before the age of 4 vanish. You know what I mean? So there's this really strange phenomenon between the ages of 4 and 7, where when you're 5 and 6 years old, you can remember right back to your infancy. But after the age of 7, your first 4 years of memories, or 3.5 or so years, disappear for some reason. That area of the brain rewires itself. So they're saying that child never, the part of that child's life development when they were deciding to make the child a girl was locked in a memory that's gone, that was wiped. That's horrifying. But it's also interesting that Good Law Project, people who are still to this day all giving to the Good Law Project are, let's face it, these are some pretty naive people who must be isolated from reality if it's not taking you until now. But at least those people are being reached. That's a good sign that if you are still giving to the Good Law Project in the year 2024, you're a pretty extreme person who's difficult to reach. And if those people are actually starting to get reached now, that's a good sign.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think people would often ask me, are you worried about what's going to happen when Labour get in? And I said, well, there might be two things that happen. One is that Labour create a living hell on earth for women, which wouldn't be an ideal thing for Keir Starmer to do, I think, if he wants to get re-elected. But the other thing I thought might happen is that they might just kind of wander out into the light a bit more than they should. Like, as we know with the Denton's document and various examples in real life that we've seen, subterfuge is the way this movement has advanced its interests over the years. It's why places like the NHS are suddenly, forcing nurses to undress in front of cross-dressers, it just came from fucking nowhere, and it's actually baked into society. Tesco's, I'm in touch with the women from Tesco who are terrified. They're terrified of being found out. Everything has to be double-checked, and these fucking privileged women, there's 2 who went to some Pride Awards who were photographed, who apparently represent Tesco's, they're making life a living hell for their customers and their workers,
I think there's, one of the massive problems is going to be the unpicking. I do think that things are changing. The ban on puberty blockers. It's, the conversation is open. It's out there. Everyone has heard of it. Literally everyone has heard of it. Everyone knows that there's something up. And I think things are moving, but the unpicking of everything that's been put into place is going to take years. I mean, it really is. And it's absolute fucking terrible waste of people's lives and time. Honestly, the feminist, the time that has been taken away from feminists is just unforgivable. It's unforgivable, honestly.
It really is. I mean, and also, and again, one of the things that really hurts me about my friends on all this is that, we've spent the last 6 years having to get into these arguments with fucking some real lowlifes,
Yeah. Yes.
The bloke Cameron, who was arrested in Scotland, friend of Nicola Sturgeon, turned out to be a sex offender and a fucking bully and a rapist. Another one was just found out there, the one who had the decapitate TERF signs. I recently got into an argument online with who has just been convicted of rape, and we're fucking fighting with these people. We can't even get our friends to say, oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't let these people have too much power. Maybe, do you know what I mean? They actually the effect it's having on our lives, and they don't fucking care enough to intercede.
And we're the ones who are going to pay. There's going to be a time very soon where all of those very people who cut us out of their lives for us being so unpalatable with our combating in this, they're going to end up having the same views that we have, and they're just going to carry on, and they'll still keep us out of their lives because they'll forget that we're the ones who did all that. We're the ones who did all that fucking work. And they'll just pretend they weren't, ever on the wrong side. They'll just pretend that we were just too extreme all along. We weren't. We had to do the fighting, So I'm really mad because I already know that those lost friends of mine are not coming back because they're going to pretend that they were right all along, and they're going to pretend that I was like, no, I was fucking right all along, and they were keeping their heads in their asses,
Well, it's like the next time if it's like I don't know, aliens asking people to shop in their mates, these guys aren't going to be standing up for you. You know what I mean? Everyone will have a good excuse. It's like, how can you ever trust them again? The only people I trust now are people who are in this fight. Speaking of people who are in this fight, we have our guest joining us now, Kara Dansky. Kara, hello, how's it going?
Hello, welcome back.
Hello.
Hi, it's great to be here. How are you all?
It's
good.
Great
It's
to
so
see
lovely
you.
to
It's been a
see you.
while.
Yeah, there's been a lot of water under the bridge, and things seem to be changing at an incredible rate here, Kara. We were just wondering how does it feel over there? Does it still feel like a stately battleship turning around, or what's going on?
So yeah, we're still turning a battleship. So from my vantage point, things are changing quickly, but that's partly because I pay very close attention to what's going on with legal cases. And I'm very happy to report that Biden's Title IX rule changes are in serious trouble.
Oh, great.
There's one case currently before the Supreme Court that does not involve Title IX, but does involve a state law, in this case, Tennessee, that bans puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones for kids. And the latest court to have ruled in that case ruled that a state may, consistent with the law and with the Constitution, prohibit puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones for kids. And for some reason, the Biden administration asked the Supreme Court to review it. And pretty much everyone I talk to thinks the Biden administration is going to lose before the Supreme Court. And we're going to get a really solid win on states banning puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones for kids. That is currently before the Supreme Court. And what's even better, I wanted this to be a conversation, not a monologue, but
don't worry.
What's even better about the case, and this gets a little complicated legally, the ACLU brought the case and they said that the Tennessee law banning puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones violates the rights of transgender people under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And what the appellate court in this case ruled is that the phrase transgender people does not constitute a suspect class for constitutional analysis purposes.
Oh.
One, transgender people is not a sufficiently coherent phrase to establish such a class. 2, the state of transgender, whatever it means, is not immutable, as exemplified by the fact of detransitioners. And 3, and this is the one that blew me away, the appellate court ruled that transgender movement is not politically powerless. That was huge, because
Wow.
they always argue that it's a marginalized community that has no power. We all know that's not true. And to hear a federal appellate court rule that trans is not a politically powerless group made me very happy. So that's
Yeah.
all before the Supreme Court as we speak.
That's great. That's really great, because like I've always felt that the core problem is the absolute meaninglessness of that phrase, trans people. It's been adopted. You see it all the time being trotted out, but no one has yet explained that to me. And every time I've asked for an explanation, I've
No.
never heard the same one twice.
Well, and what's really great is that the appellate court that ruled, in ruling that transgender people is not a coherent category, it used WPATH's own definitions against it.
Mm.
Wow.
And I'm working on a brief before the Supreme Court for Women's Declaration International USA. We're going to use WPATH's definitions against it, HRC's definitions against it. We'll use Stonewall, and we'll use the ACLU's definitions. None of those organizations can even define it coherently.
Oh yeah, I remember the Stonewall one said something like transgender people may include people who identify as this, and it was like, whoa, hold on a second. We're already going 3 degrees of separation from what we
Yeah.
want, which is the definition of the exact word. You know, it's how they think they this and they feel like this. It's like, what is it? What is it? Anyway, sorry. Kara, I have that video. I think I might be able to show it for you because it is extraordinary. Can you give us the context for it before I do?
Yeah. So quick context. You have to know who Maud Marone is. Maud is a lefty, progressive feminist who lives in New York City and has children in the New York City school system. She ran for city council of New York several years ago as a Democrat. And in the course of her campaign, she put "I stand with J.K. Rowling" in her Twitter bio. Now, of course, we all know what that means, right? She's not talking about Harry Potter. That's a turf bat signal. So she and I managed to connect, and we've been friendly ever since. The Democratic establishment in New York got very angry at her. She lost her council bid. She went on to run for Congress and lost that. At this point, she's decided to hell with the Democrats. She's an independent. But she won an election to serve on her local school district board. It's called a community education council, but it's basically a school board for her district in Manhattan. And she introduced a resolution to reevaluate a 5-year-old New York City policy that allows boys to compete in girls' sports on the basis of their gender identities. It was the most reasonable resolution one could imagine. All it said was, hey, New York City schools, let's evaluate this policy and see if it's working. It didn't say no boys and women's sports. It didn't say anything that could, in any sane world, be construed as controversial. It said, look, there's a policy on the books. Let's see if it's still working. Should be totally uncontroversial in a functioning society. And of course, people freaked out, and it won. It won in part because people freaked out and showed themselves for who they are. It won in her council 8-3. And so then one of the 3 members who voted against it submitted a resolution to rescind her resolution. And so there was a hearing back in June, and she invited me to come give a 2-minute statement in support of her resolution, which I was happy to do. So that's the context. And so walking into this thing, the vantage point that you're looking at right now is me along with Kim Jones. For anyone who doesn't know, Kim Jones started Icons to protect women's sports. She lives outside New York. I took the train up from DC. We're sitting there. There are a couple other people who I didn't know, but were definitely on our side. And we were just sitting back there minding our own business. We were there to give statements, but we didn't have any turfy signs. We weren't wearing adult human female shirts. I didn't have any WDI insignia with me. We were just there minding our own business in the back. So we're sitting in the back of the room at this point. And then a bunch of students testified, mostly against Maud's bill. It was very sad. One little 11-year-old boy got up there wearing a little halter top and a skirt, and his mother got up there with him and proclaimed, she's the daughter I never thought I would have. It was really it was really upsetting.
I love how the second their kid comes out as trans, they suddenly come out with their insults. That's such an insult to your son. She's the daughter,
Yeah, it's true.
And you know, if this boy ever comes to accept himself as male, she's going to accuse him of killing her daughter, right? I mean, it is so emotionally manipulative. It's awful. Okay, so we're sitting in the back minding our own business, and then someone got up to speak in support of Maud's resolution. Turns out that was a guy named Justin. He's a gay guy from Gays Against Groomers. He's Black. The only reason that matters is that the audience who was there to oppose Maud's resolution was overwhelmingly white, right? So they always accuse us of racism, but this was really a bunch of white people shouting down a gay Black man, which is what they did. They screamed their heads off. So the council chair shut it down and told everyone to go away, which they did, but they said they would come back to the discussion. So then these people realized they can't just scream their heads off in order to shut down their opposition. So the next person to get up in support of Maud's resolution is also from Gays Against Groomers. She's a Black bisexual woman. So this is the second person to speak up in support of Maud's resolution, the only two Black people to have testified so far. And these people are, first of all, shouting them down. And second, they did this.
Okay. Let me say, sorry, now I hopefully can do this.
I'm in New York City at a hearing to discuss a resolution to call on the city to reevaluate policy allowing male athletes to compete in women's sports. The speaker is trying to speak on behalf of that resolution, and this is the cult of trans response. This is the cult of trans, New York City, June 12th, 2024. So much for speech. I'm in New York City.
What is the howling at the start?
Yeah, so again, we're sitting in the back of the room. So what these people have done is stand up, turn around, and just howl and hum in our faces. We're like 5 feet away from them, 4 feet away from them. It was the strangest thing I'd ever experienced.
That is actually someone howling.
Yes.
Oh my God, I gotta listen to it.
Play it again so that we can see that we know this.
If you weren't looking at the chairs and noticed that the chairs are facing the other way, you wouldn't realize that the entire audience is turned with their backs to the speaker.
Call on the city to reevaluate. I'm in New York City at a hearing to discuss a resolution to call on the city to reevaluate policy allowing male athletes to compete in women's sports. The speaker is trying to speak on behalf of that resolution. And this is
That's amazing.
Pure Scientology. Oh my God, this looks like a group of Scientologists, you know?
Yeah.
2024.
So, yeah. So remember, that was the second time. The first time, they just stood up, turned their backs on the speaker and their backs on the council and just screamed their heads off. And we were sitting there having no idea what happened. I'm sitting there with Kim Jones, and we thought they'd figured out that we were TERFs and maybe they were screaming at us, but they weren't. They were just trying to drown out the speaker, who's this gay Black man.
Wow.
And the second time, they just hummed. And it was so stunning. I wouldn't even have gotten that footage if Kim hadn't just like elbowed me and said, "You've got to capture this."
Yeah.
Pure cult. Pure cult.
Really creepy. Like somebody has said, it's like they were like zombies. They kind of were.
Yeah.
It's really, that was disturbing, actually. I didn't know people would be able to sort of collectively behave in that weird way.
This terror of collective behavior too, when you see all the group, like the critical mass of enough people acting crazy that everyone else feels compelled to act crazy too.
Yeah.
It makes you look at like the struggle sessions of China and start to get it in a different way, you know?
Yes.
This is a cult of conformism, apart from anything else. It's interesting. I heard something about this recently. That many apparently in on average, and this may get me into hot water, so please understand I'm saying on average, apparently, women, when asked to go one way or the other, will often go towards the prevailing social order. You know what I mean? And the thing that seems to have happened in the case of trans is that the prevailing social order has been changed from within, right? So it's kind of, the prevailing social order has been artificially arrived at through subterfuge, through lack of debate. Like the types of changes they're talking about are so fundamental to our existence that it would never have got this far if it hadn't got this far secretly, you know? And this is what you have in return. You have these people who do not know how to think about this issue. So they have to just drown it out, you know?
Because remember, they are actually supporting giving really powerful drugs to children in order to prevent them from going through puberty, which will result in massively life-limiting changes, hugely life-limiting changes to the course of their life, their adulthood. And people are just going along with it. And they're going along with it uncritically.
People don't.
Worse than uncritically, right? I mean, unlike many of you, I was reluctant to refer to this as a cult because unlike someone's talking about Jonestown in the chat, it is like Jonestown, but because there doesn't seem to be a central personality leading it, I was reluctant to use the word cult. No longer. After that experience, it is absolutely obvious that it is completely a cult. And I do want to acknowledge it was the vast majority of people in that room were women. It was mostly women. And many of them noticeably had double mastectomies. I mean, it's undeniable. Yes.
Yeah.
And I will
social order being a problem. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I just want to, before I forget, Chase Strangio was in the room because Chase's kid is in that district.
Right.
Oh, wow. And I'm sure Chase Strangio was likely one of the turn around and look the other wayers.
Well,
but the prevailing social order is such a strange.
We should explain who Chase is.
Chase Strangio works for the American Civil Liberties Union. Is a female to male trans activist.
Oh yeah.
Such an extremist that Chase is a complete opponent of freedom of speech and the civil liberties of free expression and wants to have books banned and things. And that goes to show the upside down, topsy-turvy world that we're living in. But most people make their decisions not based on logical argument. Most people aren't reasoning through their views on things. They're looking to the prevailing social order and then putting themselves where they feel most comfortable in relation to it. They look at what's on Friends and they decide, I'm more extremely conservative than the norm, so I like to stand over here. Whatever the norm is, I'm going to put myself a few degrees more conservative than the room temperature of the norm. And if you're a more activisty type, you're going to put yourself a few degrees more spicy and progressive than the norm because you believe the world should be progressing more quickly or whatever. It's all the Overton window. It's all relative to what you think the prevailing social order is. But in the age of social media, in the age of there's no sort of trust network, there's no hierarchy of what's a reputable source and what's not anymore. Nobody knows what the norm is. And as a result of social media eroding that, the legacy media, which for a long time was the gatekeeper of what the norm is, has panicked and actually eroded their own trust even worse.
Yes.
They've gotten even worse. So at a time when social media was being exploited by bad actors, the trans movement snuck in to the prevailing social order by calculated attempts by men with malevolent interests exploiting teenagers on Tumblr. Teenagers there was no gatekeeping, there was just free access to an army of kids who gained massive amounts of authority and power because of the lack of because of the free access of information and no gatekeeping and no trust networking and ranking of what's high reputation and what's low reputation. And as a result, that means we need media sources that we can trust who can kind of adjudicate and evaluate what's a reasonable position and what's not. And they've gotten even worse. They've gone backwards. You know, the New York Times and all these papers of record, they've exploded and detonated their own reputations at a time when we need a sort of sense of baseline normalcy more than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've often felt that. And Kara, over here we have the BBC are going through a moment where, like, a lot more people than would normally notice are kind of tweeting that they only do stories about drag queens. For some reason, they're obsessed with stories about drag queens.
That was astonishing, that story yesterday. And it was really fucking long. I mean, I started reading it. I just got bored. I got so bored with it. I couldn't even finish it. But they haven't talked about anything else. Not the WPATH files, not the cast report, but how expensive it is now to be a drag queen.
But it seems to me, Kara, sorry, I'll put a question on this. It seems
they
to
should
me
throw their wigs into the harbor in protest of the cost of wigs. Sorry.
America was kind of ahead of the times on not trusting journalists. Like there was a distrust of journalists. I remember, and I was very shocked by it at the time when Trump was. He would have journalists in a pen and stuff like this, because he hated them so much. But the thing that's happened in the years since then is that we see journalists lie to our faces all the time. Like this idea, for instance, spread about by this recent sports journalist about a trans darts player. That he doesn't have any advantages over his opponents. It's just an absolute bald-faced lie. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm just wondering where, is the media over there, because you started sooner? Is it showing any signs of reflection? Is it showing any signs of change? I know you've been on Dr. Phil and I forget who else, but Bill Mayer, was it?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, you should be. But what were you on again? Tucker?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but you were also on Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil seems to be peaking in real time. What's your experience of this kind of conversation opening up a little bit?
Well, it's just taking forever. So it's frustrating, but the cast review did get a hearing on NPR, of all things. NPR covered the cast review before anyone else did, I think. The New York Times gave it some fair coverage. There's a woman named Pamela Paul, who's an opinion writer at the New York Times, and she's able to get out some pieces that are critical. She doesn't go quite as far as I would like, but they're good. I have wasted an astonishing amount of time writing letters to the editor supporting more such coverage. They just go ignored. So that's frustrating. Newsweek will occasionally publish critical pieces. Newsweek published me in December 2022 when Scotland was going through its reform process. But Newsweek is really back and forth on this. Newsweek will publish something critical, but the next day they'll publish something very transy.
That kind of brings me back to something I was thinking about Labour. Sorry to segue into this, but it might have parallels over there. Like, obviously, Wes Streeting has shown some very, very important sense on a subject that should have been, taken care of years ago. He's done so very, very with a lot of conviction, and trans activists are going absolutely insane that one of their major lies, the suicide lie, has been completely dismantled. And what I'm thinking is, Wes Streeting can do that, right? But Angela Eagle still hasn't apologized to the LGBT Alliance, refuses to, in fact, and still hasn't apologized, I think, to, was it Lesbian Labour, So we can't have this situation. It can't continue that we have one side of a government saying, yeah, we got this totally wrong, so sorry, and another side pretending there's still something to defend, when really the medical scandal undermines everything else. Don't you think?
Well, yeah. So we don't have that, right? We don't have anything like the Democratic Party showing any sign of backtracking. What we do have is a tiny handful of Democrats who are voting to protect women's sex-based rights and voting to protect kids from dangerous hormones at the state level. But at the federal level, we don't have anything remotely like that. So it doesn't get into the news. And the Democrats at the state level who have voted in a manner that's consistent with our values and principles, they just get pilloried in their local media. So I'm thrilled to say that WDI USA is having its third convention in September. I'll make this relevant, I promise. We're having our third convention in September in Atlanta, and 2 Democrats, women, who have voted to protect sex-based rights and protect kids from hormones, have confirmed that they will speak about what it's like to be a Democrat protecting women's sex-based rights at the state level. So that's very good. Another thing that just happened very recently that makes me very cautiously hopeful, you may have seen, is that a Biden judicial nominee went before the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is a woman who had served as a federal magistrate judge, and Biden had nominated her to serve as a federal district judge, which would be a lifetime appointment and a promotion in her case. And a man named John Ossoff, who is a Democrat from Georgia, voted with the majority to block her nomination, which is huge.
Oh, yes.
Because she had put a man who I believe had been convicted of 2 child rapes and at least 1 count of possession of child pornography in a federal women's prison. And so John Ossoff, thanks to him, he said enough is enough, and he voted to block her nomination. So that's encouraging.
Right.
But unlike our sort of trans activists don't freak out and make a huge stink about it because it's more convenient for them to ignore it.
Right. It's interesting. That the CAST report broke through. So when I was in Australia, people were telling me that, the NHS is taken very seriously in other parts of the world, which is why the interim report had an effect. And something else. Actually, when was the CAST report released?
It's been 6 weeks or
Must
something
be.
now.
Yeah, it must have been about 2 months.
Yeah,
I think, the Times, I forget the journalist's name who writes the piece at the Times. She said it's been like 6 weeks, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because the WPATH files have been out since March 4. So it's kind of interesting that the CAST report got through, but the WPATH files didn't. Can you explain why that might be? Is it just because of the glamour, I guess you could say, the NHS has?
I mean, I think it's just there are journalists here who are doing their best to get critical pieces through their editors. And my guess is there are a lot of journalists at the Times and elsewhere who really wanted to report on the WPATH files, but just couldn't get it through. And then someone, like Artie, I forget the name of the journalist, someone pushed through the CAST report. I don't know. I'm not a journalist. I'm not in those spaces. I don't know what it's like, but I can say I am in contact with, I can't say her name because I'm sworn to secrecy, but I'm in contact with someone who is the chief legal correspondent of a major US media entity, and she's totally on side and she wants to do something, and it's just a matter of getting it through her editors, and
Right.
she'll do what she can until she can't, right? There's Barry Weiss who worked at the New York Times, and she was just so repulsed by the culture of the New York Times in general, not just on this issue, but in general. She just left and started her own thing called the Free Press, which is great, and I subscribe to them. So maybe this woman I'm in touch with at this major media outlet will just get sick of it and quit. I don't know, but I think a lot of them do their best. They just can't get past the editors.
But there's also a big difference, isn't there, in healthcare in America? The CAST report wouldn't really affect in a lot of ways American healthcare. What's going to change there is the lawsuits after the fact, presumably, is what will make people stop prescribing puberty blockers rather than just having the Secretary of Health say, no, we can't do this.
It's really interesting.
The lawsuits will use the CAST report, right?
Yeah.
That will be important evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the CAST report's really interesting because the NHS is a centralized authority. Like Canada has universal health care, unlike the US, but Canada doesn't have a central health authority. Canada is basically privatized public funded insurance. So all the hospitals, all the doctors, those are private enterprises, just like in the US. The only difference is when you get a bill, that gets faxed over to the government to pay it. Whereas in the UK, it's a central system where those doctors, those hospitals, those are government institutions. Those are parts of the government. And that gives it such a bigger heft of like having the public interest in mind and having a kind of centralized, organized authority about what the best medical interest of the populace is. We don't get that in the US because it's all about money. And we don't get that in Canada either because it's still all about money, you know, and it's also splintered between all the states. So the UK being one big, massive, monolithic entity of health gives it huge gravitas in the rest of the English-speaking world. Yeah.
Can I also add to that? Well, one reason why it might be hard to get things through editors is because if you put WPATH into a search engine and click on news, you're going to see WPATH cited in article after article going over the last 6 or 7 or 10 years. And it's going to be very embarrassing, you know? I mean, someone put it as, when you've been pretending the emperor has clothes on for 8 years, it's not something you can easily return from. I wonder whether careers will end up with this, you know?
I mean, I wonder that too, and we shouldn't let a moment go by without noting that Redux Magazine published a massive expose on WPATH and its connection with porn sites where, you know, male fetishists are fantasizing about castrating teenage boys. I mean, it's just so dreadful.
Yeah. They write short stories about boys being transitioned. They write so-called erotic short stories about that. Those are the people who have made the guidelines that influence the NHS and all over the world as best practices, or as they laughably call them, standards of care. You know, so it's an interesting one. I'm eager to try and think of ideas of ways of getting the WPATH files to more people. It's an extraordinary document when you dig into it, and it's really disturbing, you know.
No, and it's true. It's just not. It's not something that, like, I think a lot of people have heard of the Cass report now. Even your sort of average person on the street who's just had a passing interest in this will have heard of the Cass report. But I think not the WPATH files.
Yeah,
I think you're right. It's just not had the sort of the traction.
Yes, but it's a ticking time bomb because everybody keeps. WPATH sort of assumed the position of the authority on trans healthcare, and everybody kind of needed that position to be filled. So everyone allowed it to happen. And now it's a ticking time bomb because if they're the only authority on all this stuff and they're the central authority and everyone keeps re-upping their authority. You know, you just said, Kara, for example, that the judgment relied on WPATH's own words to adjudicate against their own position. That's a time bomb waiting to go off for the trans activists. They put all their eggs in the basket of WPATH. Everybody assumes WPATH is the central authority, and when WPATH's credibility collapses, that's just going to be devastating. You know.
Well, I mean, in here we also have the AAP and the Endocrine Society who've been doing this for so long. Now they rely on WPATH, so arguably, if you're right, if WPATH crashes, then they go down with them. But they may not. They've got their own kind of zeitgeist around all this stuff. Although AAP has now been named as a defendant in a lawsuit, which is a really big deal. For a while, some of the detransitioners were suing the people who harmed them, which is a good thing in and of itself. But one of those lawsuits, and I forget which one, actually names the AAP as a conspirator in what happened to her. So that's good. So that might help bring down the AAP. I don't know what will bring down the Endocrine Society, but if WPATH crashes and the rest go down with them, I'll be thrilled. That'll be great.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it happens.
I also wanted to touch on again that you know, things are changing here again. Healthcare. We see that Dr. Helen Weberly has actually now been struck off as a doctor. I think that means she can never practice again. However, of course, you know, I'm not sure how much massive difference it'll make to the sort of gender GP. You know, because I guess that's all they need is a doctor who can prescribe, and they will carry on. However, credibility-wise, I think it sends a very strong message.
Yeah. And I think there was some talk that there might even be that the government may be looking into strengthening laws and regulations so that they can curb offshore drug sales. Helen Weberly, of course, was the founder of Gender GP. Her husband had been struck off the record. She was put through a tribunal. She was given a punishment, but not struck off. But now she's finally been struck off. So her and her husband are two ex-doctors who've been shamed and disgraced out of the medical profession. But they run an offshore online drug dealing shop, essentially, where they sell these drugs to children, including puberty blockers. And of course, the UK has just banned puberty blockers for minors. And there's talk of maybe strengthening that ban in order to curb these loopholes in which offshore organizations are still shipping drugs to kids within the UK. That would be nice to see. Yeah.
That would be great. Let me just say there's questions about what is AAP. American Academy of Pediatrics has been championing the concept of the transgender child since 2017.
Yeah. It's quite shocking, isn't it, how quickly and quietly all these places were captured. None of us, we were fighting it, but, it always reminds me of the start of the 70s remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I don't know if you remember, but the very first thing you see on Earth is a teacher telling her kids to pick the plants that we later find out are alien plants and bring them home and put them in their parents' bedroom as a surprise. And you realize watching the film, it's already over. It's already over. The revolution has already taken place. And that's kind of like what it's like when you hear groups like the American, Academy of Pediatrics, pediatric medicine has been captured. That's really, really frightening, But
I think the concept of a trans child as language has helped them immensely. Just like the she, her, he, him, and pronouns thing. Just the fact that if you call them trans children, you've already accepted the fact that trans is something that children can be, as opposed to kids who are uncomfortable and distressed, or even just saying, playing, I just want to wear a dress. Again, I've said this so many times. The one thing transactivism has done very, very well is sort of normalize the language.
They normalize the language and they insinuate themselves into the infrastructure. It reminds me, as well as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, of Roman Polanski's Chinatown, where the water authority, which nobody thinks matters, it's just they keep your plumbing going, is actually in control of, if the mob gets involved with the water authority, they have massive power over land values, because when dams get built, whole regions get flooded. So people get murdered to get inserted into these little authorities that no one assumes has any relevance. And the AAP and things like this, most people don't think there's a massive political war over the American Academy of Pediatrics. But the transactivist movement, like the mob, knows that if they can insinuate themselves into the right places, the right chairs within this dusty old organization like the Endocrine Society, they can perpetuate massive damage. They can advance their agenda enormously. It's very mob-like. It's very coordinated. These little institutions like the AAP and the Endocrine Society end up getting infiltrated by activists, and it's very, very hard to get them out. And the damage they do as they worm their way into all these authorities is so dangerous. Their attempt to overtake the World Health Organization was horrifying. Thankfully, we were able to put a stop to that one.
No, it's true. And there have been efforts within the AAP. Certain actual members of the AAP have done their absolute best to challenge the 2017 guidelines that are still in place, and they just get relentlessly shut down by leadership.
Yeah.
All of that is on record.
Yeah, we had a brilliant one this week at the BMA, the British Medical Association, is it?
Yes.
Is it that?
It was astonishing.
It was brilliant. They were trying to have a sneaky little vote without letting anyone know about rejecting the CAS report, and unfortunately for them, Hannah Barnes, author of the brilliant Time to Think. She kind of got wind of it and did a story about it, and they just pretended they weren't going to have a vote. I had an analogy I was very proud of. I said they wandered away. What was it? They wandered away
like pigeons in a drop kebab. Pretending they don't see the dropped kebab.
Dropped kebab. And that's exactly what they were like. They were just, no, what vote?
Yeah, no vote. No vote. Yeah. It's amazing.
Nothing to see here.
I know. It's always the same. It's like that Leslie Nielsen joke in Airplane, where there's a scene of absolute chaos behind him, and he's going, nothing to see here. Every single scandal in the trans world is like that. Anyway, listen, we better end it there because we've run a bit over. And no, it's not too bad. But I always think it's good to keep it neat. Kara, so wonderful to see you. If there's ever any other you want to come on, please let us know. Anything we can look forward to over the next few weeks, or anything you'd like to draw our attention to?
Well, again, I'd reemphasize the WDI USA convention, September in Atlanta. I should also say that after 3 wonderful years of serving as the U.S. chapter president of WDI, I have decided not to rerun, and I will be replaced by a lovely woman named Elizabeth Chesek, who might be here in the chat. I don't know. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm very excited to start that new chapter. Follow me on Twitter at Kara Dansky. Subscribe to my Substack. I'm just going to keep turfing as long as we have to.
Excellent.
It's good to have you over there as always, Kara. It feels a lot more reassuring with you there. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you when there's something new to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you all.
Lovely to see you. Bye, Kara.
Bye.
It's always lovely to catch up with Kara.
Always lovely. I always feel that there's grown-ups in the room when Kara arrives.
Actually, I'll tell you a nice story. Icon, the group she was talking about, they formed because of me. They saw the idea once of the I think we had an idea on J.K. Rowling, the day J.K. Rowling came out in support of Maya, we would have a GC coming out day, and of course everybody shat on it, so it never turned into anything. But at least this one woman kind of was spurred enough by it to form Icon, which now is protecting sportswomen in the US. So
Superb. Oh, that's great. That's really nice. I like that.
Yeah, that made up for the guy not quitting Helldivers. You know, that was a little. It's been.
That's hilarious.
You don't know what we're talking about. Rewind to the start. It's very funny. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We will see you next time. I'm getting a bit more comfortable with showing videos, so we must introduce that as a thing. I think it adds.
I think it was really good, actually.
Yeah.
Well.
Excellent. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. See
you guys. Bye.
Bye, chat. Oh, like and subscribe. Don't forget.